Hi, Acadiana. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Monday to you. Kind of a gray day. Those clouds really making a quick return after a little bit of sunshine this morning. That's ahead of a big cold front that's going to be coming through. Really, that first cold front's just going to be generating some showers and thunderstorms, but then a reinforcing shot of colder air is going to start to come in here late Tuesday going into Wednesday. So even though we do have a pretty good cold front that's going to come through, the temperature change isn't going to take place until sometime late tomorrow going into the early part of Wednesday. Tropics are also relatively quiet. The last advisory on Sara was issued early this morning, so it's a post-tropical system. A bit of a low pressure area still kind of spinning over the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. We'll look at that and also let you know how some of that energy and some of that moisture is going to be affecting areas ahead of the front as it starts to come through. Notice how the clouds, though, have really made a big return here. We had some sunshine early this morning, but quickly those clouds starting to move in. Not really seeing any rain on the or at least locally here on some of our traffic cams, but we do have some showers and even a few thunder showers that are starting to get going now on our radar. We'll look at that in just a minute, but we have temperatures hovering around 81 degrees. It feels like 83, so not really feeling a whole lot like November right now. We do have windy conditions, though. Those winds gusting up to 21 miles per hour, speeds running about 13. Humidity 62% as those dew points have climbed back into the 60s, and I do expect that dew point to continue to climb. That's that extra moisture that's going to be in place ahead of the front as it starts to come in. We've got a very deep low pressure area that's moving across West Texas right now, and paired with a pretty good ridge of high pressure that's off the East Coast. You get a decent pressure gradient in between. Of course, that's what causes the winds, and we've got a wind advisory in place for a large part of Acadiana, mainly the I-10 parishes and southward down toward the coast, where we could see some of those winds gusting over 30, maybe up to 35 miles per hour at times. So if you've got some loose stuff out on the patio, I got a tree that I got it tied down, but I've got a tree in a big pot that always loves to fall down. And when I start to see these winds getting up over 30 miles per hour, it rocks and rolls out there, but it's tied to the post. So hopefully it's not going to tumble over this time around. And because of that stiff southerly wind, it is pushing a lot of water upward toward the coast. And on top of that, we just finished the full moon phase, so your tides do run a bit higher anyway. And we've got a coastal flood advisory and a coastal flood warning that will kick back in later this afternoon and go into the early evening hours. They're around 10 o'clock or so. So we are going to see those tides running above normal there along the coast. So let's get into the radar first of all. Before we get into the tropics, you can see there are areas of rain that are starting to pick up here across western portions of Louisiana, but we've got a few widely scattered showers that are starting to come onto the Vermilion Parish coast as well. But most of the action has been over toward Calcasieu and Cameron parishes. These are very fast moving rounds of rain. So far, haven't seen anything super heavy. We've got a couple of decent storms that are trying to fire up out over the Gulf waters, but most of the action is a little bit farther to the west, so we'll take a little radar tour here. We'll go out into central Texas there. You can see there are some pretty good thunderstorms that are starting to approach the Houston area, and that's the region that's going to be seeing the rains first as we get into the afternoon. But the severe weather threat is going to be a little bit farther toward the east as not only the moisture starts to make its return, but we're also going to see a lot more instability. And the Storm Prediction Center has updated the risk for severe weather. We are at a level 2 slight risk over most of Acadiana. If you caught Acadiana weather today earlier this morning, we were only at a level 1, and then they updated it right after I posted that video. But we are a level 2 slight risk, and there's a possibility we could see a couple of isolated tornadoes and some wind gusts getting in excess of 60 miles per hour. I think that's going to be your main threat. But you can see we've got a very vigorous low pressure area that's here over Texas, and that kind of has been screaming out of Mexico and moving off toward the northeast, and it's going to continue its track off toward the northeast, maybe a little bit more of a northerly component, maybe like that. But we've also got a pretty good ridge of high pressure that's out here to the east, so the pressure gradient in between is really throwing those southerly winds northward toward the Louisiana Gulf Coast. Of course, the remnants of Sara is right about there. It is now offshore. We'll take a closer view of that. And also, earlier in the weekend, if you follow my social media posts, there's a little concern that a lot of that moisture is going to get sucked up into this system that's moving across Texas right now and could possibly provide us with a heavy rain event. And we've had a heavy rain event here last week, and we've had a couple of heavy rain events here now in the last several weeks since we kind of ended the drought earlier in the month. But we are starting to see that moisture lift northward. But right now, I think more of the heavy rain threat is going to be a little bit farther to the east, over toward the eastern part of the Gulf Coast. So right now, severe weather, I think, is going to be the biggest threat. It will be isolated. It's not going to be a widespread severe weather event, but do be on the lookout for a couple of tornado warnings possible later on this evening and overnight tonight. So the Gulf of Mexico, you can see we've got that moisture starting to lift up from Sara, and the wave heights are pretty high out there too. So again, not a great boating day. Hopefully we'll start to get some better boating days after these series of cold fronts comes through and things will relax. So if we're going to see any good boating days, probably not going to be to the latter part of the week or the weekend. But there's the remnants of Sara. Tremendous amounts of rain coming down over Central America, particularly in Honduras, but also Nicaragua, Guatemala, and also over toward Belize, getting that heavy rain. And I was reading that there's somewhere about 11,000 folks that have been cut off because of flooding over parts of Honduras. Several towns and villages that are there have been cut off from the flooding, and that flooding is still going to continue even though the rains have stopped as everything starts to drain off. But what's left of tropical, what was tropical depression Sara, is now right over here over the Bay of Campeche. You get a little bit of a swirl there, so we'll watch that. And there have been some models that keep a little bit of the energy together, kind of lifting it northward over parts of the Gulf of Mexico and feeding into that cold front as it moves eastward through Florida and Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi as well. There's your Central American satellite. Again, not a lot going on right now. They're finally starting to get some relief from all of that very heavy rain. And the Caribbean Sea at this point really doesn't look too bad either. Although there is a front that's out over the Atlantic Ocean, you can kind of see that right about in there is that front. And then you got a little bit of moisture here. So if we're going to see any kind of new tropical development, that would be the most likely area. But right now that doesn't seem very likely. But I will say that I'm not quite sure if we're completely done with hurricane season yet. There's a little hint in some of the models and also kind of the flow of where the tropics are going that there might be one more weak system perhaps develop over parts of the Caribbean here in the next couple of weeks. No threat to North America and really not much of a threat to Central America either. Anything that would develop would most likely develop in the far southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea, maybe down in this area, and then quickly advance its way off toward the northeast. So nothing showing up right now. Is just kind of a gut feeling, and looking at some of the extended models and looking at the players on the global models here coming up in the next couple of weeks. So can't quite rule out that hurricane season is completely done yet. Let's hope we stop at Sara, but don't be surprised if you see a Tony coming up a little bit later on. But at least for the next several days, we don't have too much to worry about. The National Hurricane Center not expecting any tropical activity here for the next week or so. Now, the water temperatures are still kind of hot. Gulf of Mexico can still support tropical weather, although the wind shear has been quite strong and you've got that front. So the possibility of Sara regenerating into a tropical system is not likely, but it could be a fairly deep low pressure area and kind of a swirl that will move northeastward. If it gets up there ahead of that frontal boundary, especially over parts of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, you might get enough energy to get a heavy rain event going, kind of similar to what we saw with Rafael last week that provided us with that heavy rain event here in Lafayette in the immediate area middle part of last week. So there is a chance that that could happen The tropical cyclone heat potential, though, is really dropping off now over parts of the Gulf of Mexico, but the Caribbean Sea still is running a little bit on the high side there, so the possibility of another tropical system, can't rule it out just yet. A couple more weeks to go before hurricane season is over. But look at the shear map. A lot of wind shear over the central and northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, so if Sara, or what's left of Sara, wants to try to make a run for it, it's not going to have a very easy time because it's running into that wind shear. And then, as I said, that area on the tail end of the front, maybe here in this particular area, I think the wind shear is going to be a little bit too strong for the next several days for anything to kind of form in that area. So let's kind of real quick go through the next 10 days of the GFS model, and you see that frontal boundary cruising all the way off toward the southeast and then kind of settling there in the middle part of the Caribbean Sea. Now, this series of fronts is going to give us some fine weather here along the northern Gulf Coast and maybe finally a chance to see some holiday-like weather, but that frontal boundary is going to get all the way down into the Caribbean, and occasionally you get something that develops on the tail end of these fronts, and there's a little bit of a hint of some low pressure developing out there by day 10 over the far southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea, according to the GFS model. Notice the Euro model also has that frontal boundary diving well into the Caribbean Sea and farther down toward the south. You get a little bit of a moisture build there over the western part of the Caribbean going out to day 10, but not much of a pressure drop there. Maybe that last couple of frames there's a little pressure drop, but at this point it's not conclusive, but just a little bit of a hint. Same thing goes with the Canadian model. You get that frontal boundary diving way down to the south in parts of the Caribbean, and then you start to see a little bit of a gathering of some moisture again going out to day 10. Perhaps a little bit of a low pressure area that wants to try to develop in this area once that front kind of slides on toward the southeast, and you see there in those last few frames, you get a little bit more of a moisture build there and maybe a little low trying to develop there off the Colombian coastline. So the ICON model is also very similar. In fact, all four of the global models are pretty close in the movement of this cold front pushing all the way down into portions of the Caribbean Sea and kind of being reinforced by some deep troughs moving across North America. But once again, even this ICON that only goes out 7 days, you start to see that moisture building there over the southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. So at this point, can't say that Sara is going to be the last one. Got a little feeling that we might end up with a Tony before things are all said and done. But the global tropics hazard outlook is not showing a whole lot for the upcoming week and going into the following week. We'll get an update on this tomorrow. Unfortunately, it won't be ready for Acadiana Weather Today's Let's Talk Tropics at noon. It usually drops a little bit later in the afternoon, so I'll be able to give you a good show of this coming up on Wednesday. But the frequency of tropical storms and hurricanes really does start to drop off. It's been kind of surprising. We've had 3 named storms develop during the month of November. Could we get 4? We'll have to wait and see what happens. We still have, 12 days to go before hurricane season has finished. So we'll continue to watch the models, but as of right now, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot to worry about for us along the Gulf Coast or really much of North America. Central America, the Caribbean, and some of the islands still need to watch stuff here for the next couple of weeks or so. And then I think things are going to start to drop off, and then we can start talking about regular old winter weather if we end up getting any of that winter weather here along the Gulf Coast. Well, that's what I've got for you today. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, tell your friends too about Acadiana Weather Today and Let's Talk Tropics. Make sure you turn the notifications on too. Don't forget, you can hear my forecast all day on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And at this point, we'll watch to see if we're going to activate the severe weather live stream later on today. We'll kind of watch and wait and see what happens. If we get a watch that gets posted, we'll probably go ahead and get the live stream going. But in between all that, you can also follow my Facebook and X pages for any updates on any upcoming severe weather that could come later this afternoon or this evening and going into the overnight period. Good news, though, it looks like most of this is going to be completely out of the way before most of us go to work and school on Tuesday morning. Well, I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I will see you on Tuesday.